Great. Okay. So I want to talk about independent consulting as a second career. And it's a really great topic, I find. It generates a lot of discussion. Just so you know, keep calm because 50 is the new 30. So there's nothing to worry about. You can't be too old to start your consulting company. Today, what I want to talk about, first of all, is the actual study that I did, and then talk about what some of the key findings were, what was the next chapter, and then start a discussion. I've got questions for you, and I think you've got questions for me. So here is the study overview. We're going to talk about the rationale, and then what the research questions were, and then a little bit about the research process, because I know, being as how you're all evaluators, you're interested in that. So first of all, there was some personal motivation for doing this. NDE had put out a call for articles, and so that was for the issue that came out in the winter of 2019. And so I knew that I could write something about consulting, and I was thinking, well, what am I really interested in? And at that time, I saw an interview on PBS with a woman called Elizabeth White, who was 55 years old and unemployed or underemployed, and she had an MBA. And I kept thinking to myself, you should be a consultant. Why aren't you a consultant? And then this was the time at which there was an election in the States. Of course, I live in Canada, but I watch with great interest to see what's happening. And I felt there was going to be a period of disruption following that election. I guess I didn't know exactly how much disruption there would be, but I was thinking about my many dear colleagues at AEA and how some of them work for the government and that their jobs might be at risk or they might not be happy in their jobs anymore. And so I thought there was just a demographic that was sort of in the category of approximately 50 or over of people who might want to be starting a second career. And maybe there's something that I could offer based on my own experience in the workshops that I've prepared and presented, and then my book as well, plus lots of blogs and Q&As and so on. So I found out some of the reasons. I did some research then, lit review, why are evaluators heading for the door, and why are professionals in general? And of course, there were organizational changes going on, restructuring and downsizing. And certainly now, for example, working from a distance may turn out to be a very positive thing for some people, and they may not want to go back to the office. A big one, though, seemed to be internal politics and working in toxic work environments. And sometimes people were just plain burned out after 20, 30 years doing the same thing. They ran into issues of ageism, which increasingly became common the older they got. And then there were concerns about their savings diminishing and disappearing and healthcare costs rising. And yet at the same time, they're healthy and we're going to be living longer. So how does this connect? For some, certainly a need for self-worth was very important. And possibly the jobs they were in currently were not giving them that value. And they also felt that they should be able to make a contribution. So having learned as much as they had learned, how could they share that wisdom? And I came to the conclusion, which is one that I've been sort of thinking about for a long time now: is retirement an outdated phenomenon? Is it really a 20th century phenomenon? We're just hanging on to it for the simple reason we haven't realized it doesn't work anymore. So here are the research questions. First of all, I looked at external and personal factors that influence the decision of study participants to actually go out on their own. And what were the risks and benefits they considered before making that decision? What did they decide? And then what were the factors that were most influential in making the transition successful? And then what happened afterwards in terms of their career and their personal redirection and reinvention? And so based on that, I did my research. And I used this book by Kathy Sharmaz, which is one that I use when I'm teaching qualitative and mixed methods in program evaluation. Of course, I teach a couple of times a year for Michigan State University. And so it was sort of a natural and a really great opportunity for me to really try to use qualitative research and grounded theory. So I did a call out on the TIG page to see if anybody was interested in participating. And I did it on the AEA LinkedIn page, and also I think the EES, the European Evaluation Society page, and also in Canada. And I got over 30 responses, which was absolutely amazing. That were so many people who were interested. And so we went through sort of a winnowing out process and so on. And I ended up with 13 interviews, which were based on the grounded theory approach. And they were open-ended and non-judgmental. The questions could be revised based on the information that I was collecting as I went along. And they did most of the talking, up to an hour and a half, which I recorded on Zoom and then had transcribed. Didn't do that myself. I sent that out, and then analyzed the data in Excel and wrote the article. So that's the story of the research. So what did I find out? What were the reasons and the benefits and the risks? What was the actual turning point for them? More information about transitions, and then going on to the next chapter. What did they do next? And then some conclusions for the study. So there were some external reasons very clearly that had to do with bullying and ageism, limited advancement and glass ceiling in some cases. Some had a low morale, there was a lack of respect, and some were definitely dealing with increased anxiety and stress. And then there was also downsizing and restructuring going on. In one case, for example, the financial crisis in 2008 happened, and suddenly this individual found that she was without a job. Another thing was the changing nature of their work. Some of them started out as evaluators, but over time got more and more administrative tasks until they found themselves being managers, which was not what they had signed up for, and they missed, as you well know, the real value and reward that's involved in being actually out in the field and conducting evaluation work. And there was simply too much bureaucracy. As one participant said, I was heartily sick of staff and budgets. After many years of being in public service research roles and in the university, I was just getting tired of all the administrative things that are associated with research in those institutions. But then there were also personal reasons. So sort of associated with that last point, they wanted to use their evaluation skills more directly. And sometimes some of them were located in places where there weren't a lot of work options. So working from home was definitely seen as an advantage. But this one, I think, is really the crux of it all in terms of changing family expectations and needs. So age 50 represents a unique life stage and is often accompanied by significant changes. Many of them describe the transition that they had experienced in their personal lives, how family responsibilities were less demanding and how children were more independent or completely independent. Some had already downsized into smaller houses or condos, for example, which lessened their financial burden. And so this made the instability of a consulting income seem less risky than it did earlier in their career. They'd also grown in wisdom and in life experience, and so they had a lot to share, and they wanted greater meaning and fulfillment in their lives. So they saw independent consulting as a way to increase their freedom and to have more control over their lives. They want to use their skills, they want to follow their interests, and they saw working from home as an advantage. However, there were some risks. So there was financial uncertainty, and so that's probably the biggest one. There were also emotional costs, though. The security and comfort of knowing that you've got a regular income in itself is something that can be very hard to give up. This one was interesting to me. A lot of them had a fear of failure. There was this kind of imposter syndrome that was going on, that they felt that people wouldn't believe them. Who am I to be a consultant offering advice and so on? And of course, some of them were worried about getting enough work. And then they were also afraid of being isolated, missing daily contact, talking around the coffee machine and so on. Well, I guess we've all gone through that over the last while. So that's something we've all had to deal with. But surprisingly, of course, as we are right now, connected by Zoom, there are lots of ways to get together with your colleagues. And of course, some of them started doing much more volunteer work and getting involved in professional organizations and so on. So here was the turning points for these individuals. 4 of them quit their job flat out because they couldn't take it anymore. 3 were terminated or laid off. 2 had no other job options. 1 took early retirement, and 1 went to a part-time contract with their employer while they were making the transition. And there were 2 of the 13 who chose not to be consultants yet. And that was mainly for financial reasons, the cost of health insurance being a big one, or simply not being psychologically strong enough or able to face independence. This is from my colleague Anne-Marie Brown. And now if you're not on Anne-Marie Brown's LinkedIn page, you definitely should be, because she does the most terrific visual stuff all the time. And she was kind enough to interview me, and I did put the interview up on our TIG LinkedIn page, and I keep meaning to put it on my website as well. This is one of her promos in advance of our actual interview, which was, she does such great things with visuals, I think. Transition tips. So remain at your current job while developing your exit strategy. So, you continue to work, but you've already made up your mind that you're leaving. Or work on a subcontract basis for a large consulting firm while you get your ducks in a row. Or get an interim job if you couldn't stand your old job and you're not ready to go out on your own, an interim job that's going to, support you financially and give you the time you need to get ready. Or work part-time at your former job if your employer was willing. And in one case, use the financial and career planning offered when they terminated her. So those were some of the transition tips. So moving right along then, what happened next? So we'll talk about study conclusions, and following that, we can have a discussion. So the study reinforced the literature about turbulent work environments. I mean, and I don't think they were as turbulent then as they are now. So it's not certainly better. It's probably worse. More reason, after all, to become an independent consultant. The workforce is aging, and there's all sorts of reasons for displacement one way or another. But age was the surprising factor. It began my study as kind of a cut point. I thought it was sort of a logical place to start, 50. But it became the defining feature of the study, because after 50, they were carving out new futures for themselves. And they felt able to do that because they were released from some of the responsibilities that had held them back earlier in their lives. Their life stage actually supported making this change. I mean, some of them had spouses or partners who did have regular jobs with benefits attached, and that was advantageous. Others had investment income that they were willing to rely on. In one case, the participant was old enough that she was on, I guess, what is it, Medicare or Medicaid? I'm not sure which is which. But anyway, so her health care was now being paid for. And I had asked them at the beginning if it was a redirection or a reinvention. And they're pretty well half and half in terms of whether they were just redirecting themselves or becoming somebody new in this new career guise. But basically, personal transformation was very evident. And they were very happy with the decisions that they had made. I mean, they were glowing, is all I can say. They were so excited about it. And so, as I said, 11 of 13 made the transition successfully. And over time, not immediately, but over time, their income rose to just about what it was before they had begun consulting. and their satisfaction skyrocketed. I mean, these were really happy people. And they found there was a better fit between their work and their personal lives. For example, one had an elderly parent, and she was able to spend more time traveling to see her because, of course, her schedule was her own. And as far as the imposter syndrome went, their confidence increased, and they found that they were actually able to take more risks, which is something a wise person told me a long time ago, that once you take one risk, it's easier to take another. And they had a great sense of pride in their accomplishments. And some were becoming experts in their own writing books and giving workshops and presentations and really blossoming. And then one unanticipated outcome for me was that I have continued to mentor some of these people who send me emails on occasion, either to celebrate with them when they get a new contract or to help them problem solve. And so there were sort of connections which have continued. So here are some of us at the last in-person AEA we were at, and that we did a great presentation, and they talked about themselves and their experiences and what happened after. So on the left, there's David Shore, and then there's Marcia Nation. And then on the other side of me is Marcela Gutierrez and Jean Hubblebank. And so interestingly enough, 4 of the 13 participants were male, which is actually a higher percentage than the last TIG survey. And so that's basically my presentation. I have some questions for you in terms of what did you learn? In what ways do you think you're doing better than you thought you were in terms of perhaps considering becoming an independent consultant? What are your biggest fears? And what areas do you feel you need to do some personal and professional development? And so finally then, what is your next wise action? And I'll just put a pitch in for my latest favorite article, which is on adaptive action and seeing the patterns that you have, being able to look at the most immediate problem rather than being overwhelmed by problems that are so large you can't even start to handle them. And I can give you the address for that.